money that doesn't have to be cut somewhere else.
All right, I want to thank everybody. My name is Adam Zimkowski. I'm a community organizer with Councilmember Kshama Sawant. I want to thank everybody for joining us for this community meeting to prepare ourselves for the Seattle City Council Budget Committee as part of the People's Budget Movement and as part of the movement to defund the police by at least 50%. On behalf of Councilmember Sawant, I want to thank you all for joining us. Obviously, hopefully most people have already signed up for public comment, which is going to happen in about 1 hour. As people who have already joined these community meetings know, we usually like to start off the meetings by demonstrating for those who have not yet signed up for public comment how to do so. It is important that you do so. This kind of pressure on City Council does have a real impact, of course, with our movement building and the activism in the streets. We've got a wonderful lineup today, including political updates from Councilmember Kshama Sawant, and then several awesome community organizers and activists that can bring to life some of the people's budget demands we have. But before we go into that agenda, let's go ahead and hear from Nick Jones, community organizer in Kshama's office, about how we can all sign up for public comment if we haven't already. Go ahead, Nick.
Sorry, was I muted? My apologies. Yeah, to get to the public comment form, you just have to get to this webpage, which you can just type in Seattle Public Comment. Should pop up right here, right at the top, and take you right to this webpage. And like Adam said, even if folks have already signed up, it's super crucial that tons of folks sign up they haven't already. Seeing hundreds of signups on the public comment puts a ton of extra pressure on City Council. You should just scroll down and it will get you to this form. You just fill this form out in your entirety, especially folks, like make sure you fill out the address and phone number slots. To make the public comment, they're going to send folks like a link to get on the Zoom call to this, whatever email address you put in here, and then they'll identify you for the public comment by the phone number that you enter. So just do all that, check all these boxes, click this. For this, you can kind of put in whatever you want, defund SPD or stop the sweeps. Then just hit submit and the email should be sent your way. So yeah, folks should take a moment now to just do that, and I'll kick it back over to Adam.
All right, thank you, Nick. So yeah, please, everybody who hasn't already signed up, go ahead and do that. But yeah, without further ado, let's go ahead and get started with our agenda. Of course, right now, over the next week and a half or so, the Seattle City Council is going to be discussing and then ultimately voting on whether or not to defund the police, as the movement, the Justice for George Floyd movement has been demanding a defund of at least 50%. What that means this year for this special budget session is $85 million at least. So we're going to hear from some activists, Teal Sean Turner and Tati Swan, who, if you've attended these meetings before, you might have already heard from them. They're everyday march organizers. We just attended Kshama and others a rally last night that they held outside Seattle Central to make that demand super clear. We're going to hear from them. We're also going to hear from Violet Lavatai and Sean Case, who are going to speak to the demand to fund renter organizing and fund eviction defense for renters who, in this period of COVID-19, are, we know, going to be facing a tsunami of evictions if we don't get organized and fight back. And then we're also going to hear from Hannah Lake, a Nicholsville resident, about the need to stop wasting millions of dollars on unhelpful and harmful sweeps and to put that money instead to tiny homes villages. So yeah, we've got a wonderful lineup, but first, as we always do, we know that the budget process for Seattle City Council is purposefully labyrinthian and purposefully is difficult to understand so that ordinary people have trouble participating in a meaningful way. This people's budget movement and these community meetings are meant to open that process up to ordinary people. So we're going to go ahead and hear from Shama Sawant with some political updates to help us orient and to be able, as a movement, to give the most effective public comment, which is just going to start in about an hour or so. So Shama, why don't you take it from here and give us that political context?
Thank you, Adam. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here at this important community meeting. First of all, congratulations to everybody in the movement for gaining a public promise from 7 of the 9 council members for 50% defunding of the Seattle Police Department. That itself is a sign of the momentum that the Justice for George Floyd protest movement has really put into action, not just in Seattle, but nationwide. And it is our responsibility, it's our obligation as those of us who are in the movement that we push this as much as possible, because when there is momentum from a street movement, that's exactly when we want to push for and win as many victories as we can. And that's why in that spirit, we won the Amazon tax. That is an absolutely historic victory, and that would not have happened without the Justice for George Floyd, Black Lives Matter movement. We won the chemical weapons ban, but then, you saw the judge's ruling. It showed that the system is not working for us, and anything we win, they will try to undermine those victories. And so it's a reminder how crucial it is that we keep organizing. So in terms of the defunding, yes, it's a huge victory for the movement that we were able to extract this promise from 7 of the 9 council members. But now the next step is demanding concrete action. So what does that look like? As Adam said, the procedures and processes in government under capitalism are they're deliberately made inaccessible. They're made labyrinthine, as he said, to make working people, ordinary people feel like we don't understand this. We don't have time to deal with this. We're busy putting food on the table, paying our rent. But our job in the movement, and our council office is the movement's council office, is to really make it very clear for ordinary people what is the fight about and how we can fight it, because we need working people on the front lines. So as many of you might know already, right now what the city council is going to be voting on is the summer budget. That's an unusual thing. Usually what happens is in the autumn, the city council votes on the budget for the following year. So the city council will come back from its August break in September this year to discuss and vote on the budget for next year, for 2021. But right now what's happening is an unusual thing because of the recession and because of the regressive taxation in our city. Most of the public revenues that the city of Seattle functions on is based on regressive taxes, which is taxing ordinary people, marginalized communities through sales taxes, and also middle-class homeowners through property taxes. And so when there's a massive recession like we are in right now, it's not just a pandemic, it's also an economic crisis. We have seen massive unemployment. And because of that, the tax revenues have plummeted, because when people are not working, they can't pay taxes. And so the city council right now is going to be debating certain proposals about how to make sure that the budget is resolved in this situation. So that's why we have an opportunity to force the city council to make decisions about the police budget for this year as well. You will hear a lot of council members talking about next year's budget, but let's talk about this year's budget. There's 5 more months left, August to December in 2020. We want to make that promise for 50% defunding translated into action for this year's remainder budget. So in other words, what we are demanding in this summer budget vote is that the city council defund the remainder of this year's budget of the Seattle Police Department by 50%. So if you look at their whole budget for this year, which was decided last year, which, and as you know, as many of you, I hope know, I have not voted yes on any of the budget so far, because the budget has not so far not been a people's budget. We have won victories in the budget, but the overall budget is not working for us. So in the budget that was voted on by the rest of the council, the amount for this whole year for the police department was decided. And so based on that amount, they meaning Seattle police should have $170 million for the rest of this year. Half of that is 85 million. It's very simple. The math is straightforward. We are saying defund SPD for the rest of this year, meaning take away 85 million from the police department for the rest of this year and fund Black and brown working class communities, fund community-based programming, fund affordable housing. We won the $18 million specifically for Black working class communities in the Central District, following the victory of the Amazon tax, as part of the Amazon tax. That was a big thing. It showed that this can be done. So we should keep going in that direction, keep funding affordable housing. We need eviction defense and renter organizing. So it's really important we have renter activists here on this community meeting. We need to stop the sweeps of our homeless neighbors because they are ineffective and inhumane. And the police department and the other departments end up spending millions of dollars every year on something that's not working and something that's really destructive. So we have these concrete proposals that have come from the community. This can be done. Use these $85 million for all these good things for our society. Unfortunately, at this moment in time, our council office is the only office that has committed to $85 million. And I want to prepare everybody in the community for what we will hear. And maybe we are not hearing this openly, but I'm certainly hearing this from other council members in conversations that are not open to the public. And it's my job to share this with the public because my loyalty is to the people in the community, to working class people, to Black and brown communities. So what we are hearing is that they are not committing to 85 million because they're saying, well, we don't know how much the Seattle Police Department has left over. You're saying $150 million, but $170 million for the rest of this year. But what if they don't have that left over? What if they spent more in the last 7 months and in the remaining 5 months, they don't have enough left over? And so our response to that is, well, you know what? If they overspent in the earlier part of this year, then they get to fund their department for less than $85 million after we have defunded by $85 million. But we are absolutely strong. Our movement is absolutely clear that if they were spending wisely, then they should have $170 million left over because that is 5 months worth of their total 2020 budget. If they overspent already, then that's their problem. They need to decide what they're going to do. For example, they shouldn't have spent $6.3 million on overtime in the first 12 days of the George Floyd protest movement attacking protesters. Why did they do that? That was a decision they made. Even though we were demanding they stop repressing protests, they kept doing it. They overspent on overtime. Okay, then now do with less overtime. So our answer is very clear. We should not budge from $85 million. They will also say that we cannot legally do this without consulting the Seattle Police Officers Guild. And something that I almost never hear, which is concerns for the labor unions, they start coming up in relation to the police. I have never heard this concern from most of the political establishment when it comes to transit services, for example. Bus driver jobs are being cut right now. We just heard from the billionaire class and from the politicians throughout the country that bus drivers are among essential workers. Well, how are you treating essential workers? The first thing you're doing is using working people and public sector unions to thrust the burden of the recession on them, thrusting the burden of the recession on marginalized communities who will lose the services. So when bus routes are cut, who's going to lose? It's the poorest people, it's working class people, it's essential workers, it's communities of color. So we have to call this out. We have to say, absolutely, we stand with the rights of public sector unions. But when public sector unions like bus drivers and other service providers, their positions are cut, we don't hear a peep from the city council. In fact, in every recession, they have pushed mandatory furloughs and layoffs on public sector unions. This happened in the 2008-2009 recession. I was not on the city council then, but that's what the city council did at that time. So we have to, really call these crocodile tears out from the council members for the labor movement and say that there's nothing illegal about this. And furthermore, This is about the interests of all workers together. All working class people, public sector unions are standing together and saying, we don't accept racism in our labor movement. That is why we kicked the Police Officers Guild out of the MLK Labor Council. So let's keep going in that direction and let's demand accountability. And part of demanding accountability from the police department is defunding the police by at least 50% and using those funds in our Black and brown working class communities for affordable housing, for renters' rights, for community programs. So I will stop at that, but Jonathan will come in later on and give more details, go over a PowerPoint presentation, and also talk about the timeline for when these votes will happen. I'll stop there. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Shama. Yeah, it's really quite remarkable to just think about in just 12 days, I believe I heard you say, more than $6 million just in Seattle Police Department overtime. And if you just think about those $6 million put to youth jobs or to housing or to other services desperately needed by Black and brown communities, would certainly have been a better expenditure of that money. But again, as Shama is saying, we're about to hear, if our experience is any indicator, a whole range of reasons for why the promises to defund can't actually be carried out right now, that we need to do this of sober mind in a thoughtful way. And again, we simply never hear that when it comes to the sacrifices that working people have to make, especially in the face of depression like the one that is upon us and is coming through the COVID-19 crisis. It is super important, and as you know, Shaman, we've noted many times, you know, we've fought to defund the police every year since we got into office, and that's part of the people's budget movement. This year, however, there's a big difference, and that difference has to do with the mass uprising around the George Floyd protests and the ongoing protests that we've seen literally every day. We've got a couple of people from the Everyday March to talk about this defund demand, to talk about you know, what will the response of the movement be to the council members' crocodile tears for the you know, the Police Officers Guild, or just these tough decisions that can't be made on a whim. So let's go ahead and right now hear from Teal Sean Turner, an activist with Everyday March and a community member fighting to defund the police. Go ahead, Teal Sean.
What's up, guys? Honestly, man, it sounds like just like a broken record. We have to continuously like repeat the same things over and over, but like it's necessary because Seattle Police Department has been committing crimes since the beginning of time. 2010, former officer Ian Burke killed John T. Williams. 2016, current officers, Michael Spalding and Scott Miller, killed Shay Taylor. And then you got the ones who killed Charlena Lyles and Sean Fear. Like, are we gonna just like keep allowing them to keep doing this to people? Like, not one officer has ever been prosecuted in the history of Seattle Police Department. Not one. And so like, it's about high time that we change that, because they're supposed to protect and serve these Black communities that they go into, but they don't even live in the city of Seattle themselves. How are we trusting people that don't even live in our city to protect the citizens of our city when they don't even live here? They don't know what's going on here. They go to their quiet little house in Maple Valley or wherever they live that's not in Seattle. Even the chief of police doesn't even live in Seattle. How can you run a police department in a city you don't even live in? That's crazy to me. So here's what you do then. You defund SPD by 50% this year. You take those funds, you reallocate it to Black communities, because let's be real, those are the communities that are being brutalized and victimized by these same officers that don't live in Seattle. And so that's where you start. You invest in their family services over there, you invest in their mental health services, you invest in things in those communities for those kids in those communities specifically, because children are the future. And they're the main ones the police target, because they know if we get them while they're young, 9 times out of 10, they're gonna go to prison when they're an adult. it starts real young. It starts in elementary school that they choose to do these things. Because instead of teaching kids trades and whatnot, we're teaching them how to pass a standardized test that the majority of the people who fail it are Black kids. And so when they can't pass standardized tests, they can't graduate, they can't go to college. So what do they do next? They join the streets. And we all know where that goes, straight to the prison system, right to the police. But when you have officers in those communities that don't even know what the heck is going on, they just see a kid or somebody doing something and they just go over there harassing them for no reason and beating on them for no reason. Like James J. Lee is a perfect example. Officer James J. Lee is a perfect example. I seen him literally run in a convenience store and start assaulting one of my friends, all because he mistook him for somebody. He mistook him for, he basically misidentified him. And so it's like, and it's still happening to this day. Like, why do the police have so much power? Why? Why are we even allowing them to even spend that ridiculous amount of money paying themselves? They spend $306 million on themselves, literally their benefit, salary, and overtime. Like, why? That's 82% of their budget right there. So basically, we're getting taxed so they can get paid. Like, whoa, okay. So basically, we're paying for them to get paid more than us when we're the ones doing the work. And we're the ones who actually pay for this city to be built. In case anybody didn't know, when you go get your tabs, there's an automatic sound transit light rail fee on there because we pay for that train, just like we pay for the police, just like we pay for these buildings. So my thing is, Black people work too. Like, don't just make it seem like, Black people are working class people too. So why is it that we don't have a say in where that money is spent? Why is it that the police get all this money when you can look at West Seattle, you can look at the Central District, you can look at the South End of Seattle? Like, look at the schools in those areas. Well, not the Central District because it was racially gentrified by Mr. Bezos and others. But look at West Seattle, look at the South End of Seattle. Those are predominantly Black neighborhoods. The Central District was predominantly Black until it was racially gentrified. And look at this, like, you can tell the difference. But let most people tell Black people live in the suburbs now and whatnot. They live in the suburbs because they can't afford to live in the city where they're from, because the city where they're from is racist. Literally racist. Redlining, segregation, it's all still exists to this day. So it's on us as a people to come out here and fight for basically our basic human rights. It is our basic human rights to be treated the same, to have property, to walk down the street and not be afraid of being killed by one of these racist cops. And then they're talking about, well, these cuts are going to affect the BIPOC officers first. And aren't you guys out here for Black Lives Matter? And look here. Some of them BIPOC cops is racist, but let's be real, it's those white men with seniorities that are the racist. So, yeah.
All right, well, thank you, Teal, Sean, and yeah, just the as we've seen, we've got a Seattle Police Department with, you know, a long history of excessive use of force, and including just many murders of community members, and with absolutely zero accountability. And at the exact same time, you see budgets just being bloated. Up to $409 million last year. And as Teal Sean notes, these are working people through taxes, working people who still have a home, paying property taxes, that are paying for just this incredibly ineffective use of resources. And at the same time, as Teal Sean notes, the Black and brown communities and working class communities are just being systematically neglected. Let's go ahead and hear from Tati, also Tati Swan, also an activist in the Everyday March and organizer, to tell us about the defund movement and what impact it could have, putting this money to communities, and also what what the movement is willing to accept from council and what it's not willing to accept in the form of defund. So go ahead and take it, Tati.
Hey, so the movement, at least my group specifically, that I've been with every day, we are wanting to defund SPD by 50%, nothing less. We have heard from council members from like out of their mouth that they have like a $13 million plan and we're not going to accept it. Just from talking with Adam and Shama, I know that that's something common that they'll try to pull, but the movement is not going to accept anything less. If they try to give us something else, we are just going to have to go harder and harder and fight for what we want. With that 85 million budget cut, what we'd like is for that money to go like to neighborhoods like the South End, the CD, White Center, where there are a lot of Black people, you know, considering where we live, Seattle. But just putting that in schools, like especially Aki, Karosi, and Rainier Beach High School, putting that into healthcare, putting that into resources. I'm a Seattleite, so I grew up in a lot of community centers in the South End, and I would like those to be funded more so kids could have a safe place. I would like for us to get equity, for us to get more land, especially the fire station in the Central District. I would like for us to get that. We got it already? Already, excuse me. No, they haven't handed over the property.
Yeah.
So we don't have it. Like I said.
No, they haven't. They haven't.
Oh, okay. Misinterpretation. But I would still like for us to have more equity and just more Black-owned businesses, but we just can't do that with out of thin air, you know, because we're so in debt, we're in poverty, like we live in poor neighborhoods. But with that money, if they could help us start businesses, if they could help us have more homes, more affordable housing, all of that stuff, it would be amazing. And I'm not willing, and I know the rest of my team isn't willing to take less than 50% for that budget cut. That's it. That's all I have to say.
All right. Thank you, Tati. And frankly, sometimes the simple is better. And a movement that says we're not accepting anything less than 50% in reality, that says it all to council members, and that's all they need to know. Let's go ahead right now. And the defund movement, of course, is you know, of critical importance and is is the lifeblood of this people's budget movement in a lot of ways. But we also know that the renters' rights, well, first of all, it is also a Black Lives Matter issue, but it's an issue that is of critical importance, especially as COVID-19 has wreaked havoc on working people's jobs and pay. Let's go ahead and hear right now from Violet Lavatai, the Executive Director of the Tenants Union of Washington State, about the need for City Council to take action to support renters, to fund renter organizing, to fund eviction defense. So Violet, go ahead and take it.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Councilmember Shama Sawant. I'm here to talk about eviction defense funds so we can have lawyers, legal people set up, because we're going to see a wave of evictions after this moratorium is lifted. I always say when I'm talking on panels and everything like that, Black people have the highest rate of evictions in our state, and I'm pretty sure it's around our nation. I'm always looking at the disparities, not only of our communities of low income and communities of color, but I think this defunding the SPD and investing back into our Black communities, it all ties in with housing too. If you don't have housing, if you don't have a safe roof over your head, more disparity comes to our people. I just think that we're going to see an influx of a lot of people if we don't do something right now, set up funds to help people not lose their house, not lose their homes. And we're talking about everybody who has lost their jobs, and the poor communities too. It's our most vulnerable and marginalized communities that we have to protect. Funding more eviction defense funds is investing back into organizations like Housing Justice Project, Northwest Justice Project, so they can help all the people who are getting evicted. There are people that already have lost their home because of COVID. If we don't do something right now and ask for this funding, which is really, really important, more people will be on the streets. And that's the thing about who are affected more is our vulnerable and marginalized communities. If we invest this money back by defunding and putting more back into the eviction, eviction help for the lawyers to help these the citizens of our city, it will lessen more people going on the streets. And so I'm going to testify this morning. My staff really feels it's important that they signed me up this morning for City Council to testify. As the executive director of the tenant union, we're getting calls about landlords still being awful. I mean, I'm working on a case right now to where they're trying to evict one woman, and the moratorium has been put in place not only by our governor, but in the city of Seattle. And I think we will make history by telling the world, if City Council passes this defunding, investing more in our Black communities, I think we would be a role model so what the other states in our nation can see. We've already set examples by no winter evictions, the first in our nation. Ordinances and fights like that, this is what we have to do constantly to save people from going on the streets. And so today I'm going to testify about putting more funding in eviction, defense for our amazing lawyers whose works to help people who are low income and everything like that. So thank you for this opportunity.
All right, thank you so much, Violet. And let's go ahead and hear from one of those renters who has been actively organizing in the context of COVID-19 and who can speak to the impact that organizing has, and of course the need for City Council to support renters who make up the majority of working people in Seattle. Sean Case is a tenant at the Ben Lemon apartment building and a member of the Ben Lemon Tenants Collective. So Sean, go ahead and tell us about your organizing work and the support that City Council could give to renters to continue that work potentially.
Hey, can you all hear me? Yeah, thank you, Adam and Shama, for inviting me to speak today. And thank you, Violet, for all the work that you do and everyone at the Tenants Union does. It's hugely important. I want to be clear that I'm here speaking for myself. I'm not speaking on behalf of any of my neighbors today, but I want to talk a little bit about what we've been doing the past several months. We started getting organized in late March by sending a letter to our landlord requesting rental assistance for people out of work. We had a huge amount of momentum at the beginning. And we sort of got these passive aggressive responses, and that was incredibly demoralizing. But we kept pushing, and so now we're sort of in a place where as like individuals, there's not much we can do. Like there's a huge power imbalance here between renters and property owners and property management companies. My property management company is Cornell and Associates, who I'm sure a lot of people watching this know that name. I just saw an article yesterday that they are retaliating against tenants at a Ballard apartment building for putting Black Lives Matter signs in their windows. These are this kind of companies we're talking about. Violet's right when she says that people are already being pushed out by COVID-19 right now. The first of my neighbors to be forced to leave because they can no longer afford to live here despite the eviction moratorium, because that rent just keeps stacking up, that debt's not going away. The first two people to leave my building were two of the few Black and brown neighbors I have in the building. And I think everyone on this call knows that that's not a coincidence. Just as COVID has been hitting BIPOC communities the hardest because those communities have been systematically victimized by a racist, white supremacist capitalist system, those same communities are being hit hardest by the economic crisis generated by COVID. And this affects every renter. I'm worried about, myself being pushed out now. I don't know what the next couple of months looks like for me. And a lot of my neighbors, not just in my building, but across the city, I think are in the same place. So I think it's hugely important that we talk about more funding for renter organizing, because it takes a lot of work. And, the only regret I have about any organizing me and my neighbors have done is that it hasn't been strong enough to, protect my neighbors, been able to raise funds, but that's just a Band-Aid. What we really need is a really strong renters movement here in Seattle, because a movement's the only way that you win huge demands. So we need to fund renter organizing, and we need to fund housing justice projects. Another thing I think we need to be clear about is, while it's great that Governor Inslee has extended the eviction moratorium through the middle of October, that's not really enough. One thing that I really worry about in his statements the other day is talking about allowing for landlords to, despite the eviction moratorium, still raise rents on tenants. And that's just eviction by another name. That's just eviction by rent increase. And we need to be organizing against that right now, because people are already being pushed out. And if property owners get the green light to raise rents, that's going to have a huge impact for the worse. I think we also need to push beyond that for canceling rent and mortgage payments in this crisis. And I think that the banks and the wealthy should pay for that because they have the money and we don't. This crisis isn't going away anytime soon. And if things go on like they're going now, we're going to have more people on the street. And when I say on the street, I don't mean protesting. People should be on the street protesting. I mean living on the street, and that's not okay. I think this also points to the need for more public housing as well. I think the Amazon tax was a huge win, and it sets the groundwork for further victories for public-owned housing and other services that are very greatly needed especially by Black and brown communities, but by all working class communities in this city and across the country. The Amazon tax is not the end game. That's just the beginning, and I think we need to keep fighting on that front as well. Thank you all for being here today and for listening. And I encourage every renter watching this to start getting organized, start talking to your neighbors, because that's the only way that we can protect ourselves.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Sean, and totally agree with the fact that by funding renter organizing and eviction defense, in reality, that's also an anti-homeless program. Let's go ahead, and another fundamental demand of the People's Budget Movement has been to stop the sweeps and to invest instead in tiny house villages. So let's go ahead. We've got a speaker right now, a resident of Nicholsville, Hannah Lake. Let's go ahead and hear about the work that Nicholsville residents are doing to fight to stop the sweeps and for funding for tiny house villages. Go ahead, Hannah.
Thank you. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay. Tiny homes are the future of homelessness. People get the dignity of having their own place to live, have responsibilities that ready them for work if that's what they decide to do. And in the case of Nicholsville Tiny House Village, it's self-managed, so everyone has a say in the way the village is run. Coming from someone who's faced homelessness, tiny homes are a much better option than traditional shelters because of the level of discomfort that comes from being kicked out into the cold around 6 a.m., not being able to separate myself from people that make me feel uncomfortable because we share a room together, and having to carry everything I own until it's too much and needing to downsize what little I had until it was light enough to carry up these steep Seattle hills. There are not many things I want more than to know that Nicholsville, a place that helped save my life and get my act together, will have a future in this city. I believe Shama's movements have been revolutionary, and I'm very honored to have been asked to speak today. We have been a part of the Black Lives Matter movement, Tax Amazon, and the End Winter Evictions moratorium. As of now, the city says our village needs to move by this Saturday, August 1st. We had some ideas of where to go, but the city says none of them will work because in order to stay on city land, we need a contract with the Human Services Department, and they won't give us one. In the midst of the pandemic, they are still asking us to leave. COVID-19 cases are on the rise, more so than when the city was first shut down. It is not safe for us to go anywhere. The past deputy mayor made us a promise that he would help us find land to move to, but the new deputy mayor, Six Killer, has not kept that promise, although when I asked him about it, he said he would. I get it. Many politicians in this world don't do what they say they will, but when we're talking about people's livelihood, it is important that your word is kept. I'm not here to bash anyone. I just want to tell the council some of the history for why we shouldn't have to move, or at least why we deserve help in finding a new location. We hope also that Nicholsville will be taken into consideration when making the budget, because it is a place that has helped many people and it deserves some credit and help from the city, just like all the other villages get. Since I've written this, Jason Johnson has said that he won't sweep us on August 1st, but he has proved not to be trustworthy, and we desperately need Shama's proviso to pass in spite of his phony promises. Thank you very much.
All right. Hannah, thank you so much. And yeah, just thank you to all the Nicholsville residents who over the course of years have fought along with the People's Budget Movement and really won groundbreaking victories, including the first People's Budget Movement, which won first time authorization and funding for authorized encampments. And then from here, we now have a demand to fund tiny house villages, and of course, in the process to stop the sweeps. There's been a lot of information from a lot of community activists from Shama. Let's go ahead and hear right now from Jonathan Rosenblum in our office, who's got a slide presentation to kind of break down this main demand to defund the Seattle Police Department by at least 50%, break it down into more digestible form to prepare us in just 15 minutes. We're going to have to deliver our public comment to the City Council. And hopefully Jonathan's slide can help us really communicate that message most effectively. So Jonathan, can you go ahead and take it?
Yes, good morning, everybody. I think we have about 80 people listening in and participating in this meeting. That's fantastic. Nick, if you could queue up our slides, that would be great. Thank you. So this is a brief slide presentation on defunding SPD, our movement's demands on moving the 50% of the remaining 2020 Seattle police budget out of the police department and investing it in Black and brown working class communities. This is 10 slides, and I just want to note, don't worry about taking notes. The last slide I'm going to show you is going to point you to an easy site on Shama's website where you can access all of this information. Next slide. Well, we know that the police department budget is bloated, but how bloated is it? It is $409 million this year. Just to give you some sense of the scope, that's 27% of the city's entire discretionary budget. More than 1 out of every $4 the city has discretion to spend is in police right now. That's more than what the city spends in human services, including elder care and homeless services, affordable housing, neighborhoods, and arts and culture combined. You combine all those, and that's less than what we spend on the police. It's nearly double the fire department's budget. And just to look a little bit inside the budget, about 60% of the 200 top paid Seattle employees are in the Seattle Police Department. They're almost exclusively police officers, sergeants, and lieutenants, paid an average of $268,000 last year. Next slide. So how much is a 50% cut? As you heard from Chama earlier, the total police budget is $409 million. The budget for the remaining 5 months of this year is $170 million, and half of that is $85 million. That's what we are going to cut. For the remainder of 2020, our budget amendments, backed by the movement, say that the Seattle City Council should put $85 million into affordable housing, services in Black and brown working class communities, renter organizing, eviction defense, youth programming, and alternatives to repressive policing. I'm going to go into that detail in just a moment. We also want to stop the sweeps of our homeless neighbors. And once we do those things, the SPD would still have $85 million left, which, by the way, is still nearly 5 times what the city's entire year budget is for immigrants and refugees, for enforcing labor standards, and for civil rights combined. They still have a ton of money left over, even after this 50% cut. Next slide. How do we cut the budget? Well, the mayor's already proposed $16 million in cuts by restricting overtime, limiting training, and new equipment purchases. We would take that, and then we would add on top of it $69 million in additional cuts by cutting things like patrols that are not helping community safety and other operations, and by entirely cutting the SPD sweeps program, which is called the navigation team. But that's the program where our homeless neighbors are swept from one place to another. Okay, so that's how we get the $85 million in cuts to the SPD. Next slide, please. And here's how we would invest the money. We would put $15 million into funding Black and brown community programs, and a number of community organizations have put forward proposals. These in aggregate add up to about $15 million, and that's what our amendment is going to call for. I just want to note, we may tweak these numbers a little bit between now and Friday when the amendments actually get introduced, but this is the number we have for now. We would spend $3 million, as the community has called for, in helping Black and brown community groups develop alternatives to policing, put $700,000 into renter organizing and eviction defense, $80,000 into funding the Green New Deal Oversight Board, which was supposed to have been funded this year, but the mayor has frozen the funds. We would put $36 million into funding affordable working class housing, especially in communities that have faced displacement and gentrification. We would put $16 million, that's what the mayor cut, into backfilling the city deficit, making sure that other city programs that benefit working class people are not cut. And then finally, we would move the 911 call center out of the Seattle Police Department and into civilian control, and that moves the final $14.2 million. Those numbers add up to $85 million for how we're going to fund community needs in 2020 with this 50% SPD cut. Next slide. We're going to hear a lot of arguments about why this can't be done, and Shama reviewed a few of them. I just want to go through a couple with you right now in a little bit more detail. First, we're going to hear the political establishment say, well, these cuts are way too deep. And we know that our movement is demanding a serious shift in policing. 7 council members have promised a 50% defund, and now we need to demand that those council members deliver on that promise. We also are hearing that we have to be thoughtful, that it's going to take a while to make the right cuts. And we know that this is just a blatant excuse. When council members wanted to overturn the 2018 Amazon tax, they did it with lightning speed, actually in 48 hours. And so we know that the political establishment can move quickly if the will is there, and we have to make sure that we hold them accountable to make the cuts that they've said they're going to make. Next slide. We're starting to hear now that we have to get the Seattle Police Officers Guild to agree first to the cuts, which is absolute nonsense. Moreover, what politicians will cut and won't is all about political will. When we talk, as you heard from Shama, about vital services by laying workers off, like transit workers, nobody says in the political establishment, well, this will take time or it needs to be done right. They just go ahead and make the cuts. And we have to say to the political establishment, you need to apply the same sense of urgency to cutting the SPD because the community is demanding it. And then finally, as you heard from Shama, we're hearing, well, we don't know how much the SPD is left over because, oops, they may have overspent a bit in the first half of this year. What if they have less than the $170 million? Well, we would just say that if SPD has less than that money left over, then they need to make do with less after we've taken the $85 million out of their remaining budget. They shouldn't, for instance, have overspent by spending $6.3 million in overtime and attacking Justice for George Floyd protesters in just the first 12 days of the Justice for George Floyd protests. That's the overtime information from just the end of May through June 9th of this year. We don't even know yet what the overtime expense has been from June 9th until today, but suffice it to say, it's extraordinary. And this overspending by the police department doesn't justify minimizing the cuts that they're going to have to take for the remainder of the year. Let's go to the next slide. I want to share with people the updated City Council Budget Committee timeline so that everyone is aware of what's happening. Today, actually, the committee is not going to be discussing the SPD budget amendments, but we still need to make public comment because it is certainly front and center on the minds of the committee. Friday is when our budget amendments and other budget amendments by other council members that relate to the SPD get introduced. And this is when we first present our 50% SPD budget amendments and SPD cut budget amendments. And we are going to have a similar community meeting, and we do need people to mobilize to speak out publicly on Friday. That meeting starts at 10 a.m. Then the budget committee will also continue to meet and discuss on Monday, probably at 10 a.m., although that time is subject to a little bit of variation here. We will update you as we know more. On Wednesday, the committee will actually vote on the SPD budget amendments. That's the budget committee vote on the SPD budget amendments. And this is when we need to hold the establishment accountable and make sure that they actually follow through on the 50% cuts. And then once the committee finalizes their votes, then the following Monday on August 10th, the full city council will vote on the amended city budget for 2020, including changes to the SPD budget. Next slide, please. We know this is going to be a very difficult fight to cut the budget by 50% because we're up against powerful forces. The political establishment, big business, and the police are all fighting back, and they're fighting back very hard. Politicians will say this simply can't be done. We know, though, that as we showed from the Amazon tax fight, and Teal Sean and others have talked about this so eloquently, the Amazon tax fight shows that when we organize and fight and march, we can win, but only if we organize and build a powerful fighting movement. And we know that here in Seattle and around the country, young Black and brown activists and young workers are leading the struggle to defund the police and invest in the community. And that's what we need to do in the next 10 to 12 days to follow through on this 2020 budget fight. Next slide, please. We are running short of time, so I just want to note that if you want to download this presentation, if you want to refer to it during your comments today, or you're organizing in the streets beyond, please go to this website. It's tinyurl.com/cutspd50%. This is on Shama's website, but this is the tiny URL that helps you get there. It's tinyurl.com/cutspd50%. Please use these tools as a resource for your organizing, for your speaking out, so that we can build a powerful movement and win. So back to you, Adam, unless there's other questions or other things I need to fill in on.
All right. Thank you, Jonathan, for that really helpful and informative slideshow. We're just a few minutes out. So just to kind of, wrap up this community meeting, we've heard a lot of exciting contributions from community leaders, from Shama, from Jonathan. But it is also worth noting, I just saw in our council inboxes today, there's people emailing in saying that a petition opposing the defund of the Seattle Police Department has more than 15,000 signatures. Now, obviously, we know there's a lot of petitions in support of defunding that have far more. The last I heard, there was one with in excess of 40,000 signatures. But we know that the council members are going to try and rely on these right-wing arguments and on delay as a tactic to make the promise, but then avoid actually defunding. And to that end, our movement, as we saw with Tax Amazon and with everything that is ultimately good for and beneficial for working people, especially when it comes at the expense of big business or the police or the apparatus that, you know, capitalism uses to maintain these horrific, you know, racist structures and inequality. The only way that we can overcome that opposition is by building a movement, is by pressuring council. We know that it happens first and foremost in the streets through protest and organizing, but these budget meetings, and in particular in the next, 12, 13, 14 days, city council is going to try to do a bait and switch. They're going to try and make a few $1 million seem like actual defunding. And we know, as Teal Sean, as Tati and others have said, our movement is fighting for $85 million taken from the police department this year. And then in just 2 months' time, as Shama noted, there's the budget struggle for next year, wherein we'll be fighting for more than $200 million taken away from the police budget. Obviously, y'all only have 60 seconds to make your point today, to talk about defund, to talk about if you want renter organizing, stopping the sweeps. Of course, it always helps. Council members know there's more pressure when you're part of a movement. So saying you're from the People's Budget Movement making this demand, or you're from Everyday March making this demand, and also linking yourselves up with, you know, Councilmember Shama Sawan, who's putting forward amendments to defund the police, and supporting the council member who is actually putting forward defund legislation, also demonstrates the strength of our movement, helps us pressure city council to hopefully win a genuine defunding, investment in renters' rights, stop of the sweeps, and other basic people's budget demands, so that we can actually invest in Black and brown communities. So thank you again on behalf of Councilmember Shama Sawan's office. It's now 10 o'clock, so let's go ahead and put up the splash screen that shows people how to get to the Seattle channel. And thank you so much for joining us. We've got several dates coming up. Friday is the next one, just in 2 days. So hope to see you there, and thank you in solidarity.